There was a 1949 Chevy that left Reading, Pennsylvania in June of 1949. Contained my older brother, and my mom, and my dad, and me. I was an infant at that point. I was 4 months old. And it took 21 days to get to Alaska, driving. And from what I have been told, we stopped at many different churches along the way and stayed in parsonages, and that was our Motel 6.
Mom was 22
Right.
when they went to Alaska, and here she was with 2 children, an infant and a toddler, and traveling across the United States, having lived a rather sheltered life in Emmaus, and her big trip was to Reading to go to school. So, it was quite a difficult, I think, adjustment for her because she was missing her parents, and she had a much younger brother, Philip, and the only, you couldn't pick up the phone and say, hey, how you guys doing? My dad had a short band radio, and it was all set up, and actually he did that until
Quite a while.
But that's how you communicated with anybody in the rest of the states, was by the radio, by making calls to people, having planned ideas that you were going to communicate on this band at a certain time. When they announced my birth to my grandparents, that had been arranged. Apparently my dad's truck wouldn't start, it was so cold. And so he had to get up the dog sled, get the dogs out. How many dogs were there, do you remember?
Probably, you would typically have, it was just a couple of people that were going to go. You might have 3 to 5.
Yeah. And so he had to take Mom in the dog sled to the Quonset hut, and there was a doctor there who was filling in because the staff had been displaced with the fire, and she was very unhappy to be there, and apparently my mom and dad disrupted her canasta game, so she was sort of upset about that, but she did decide to deliver me, and then my mom was allowed to stay one overnight, and the next morning, she had to eat lunch and then leave, and lunch was fish eye soup.
Well, from what I understand, both from pictures and stories and reality of it was, they took care of us pretty well. We were able to keep our house warm enough because we had 2 different furnaces. We would use a wood-burning stove in the kitchen, which we would cook with, and that provided heat for the house. And also in the kitchen there was a makeshift furnace that was made out of 55-gallon drums, and that was using heating oil. So they would use the oil then to supplement the wood-burning stove, so we could bring the house so that in the winter, when it was really cold, and the coldest was I think about 52 below from our records, and we were able to get the kitchen finally up above freezing, so that we were able to get water, moving, and drainage and so forth. But it ended up being that without that second furnace, the house would have been unbearable.
We depended a lot on the local people for making our parkas, our mucklucks, which are the shoes for outside, and providing those kinds of things to us, and their skills in being able to do those things that none of us could have done, and which you really had to take advantage of. You weren't going to go down to Walmart and buy sneakers or snow boots. We received grocery shipments twice a year. That was it. So whatever you wanted, you had to have ordered 6 months in advance, and then it would come in on the big ship.
There were times that we were under drills, and there were times that we may have been under direct orders to cover up our windows, turn out our lights, because we didn't want to be that fishing village that a Russian aircraft ended up identifying. Sometime in the mid-50s, we were there was an earthquake, and that caused a tsunami that was local enough that it went across the bay, and it went up the Kuskokwim River. And that, mind you, we were 50 miles inland, so the swell that took place was significant. And the river up there moves from time to time because it's nothing but either permafrost or frozen sand that's surrounding it. It's very easy to degrade that. And the cemetery had to be relocated. And this is the reason that that the cemetery was relocated back then, was because the river moved and it melted away, some of that bank. And it not only exposed the caskets that were there, which then had to be removed from the bank very carefully and then relocated, but it also exposed some mastodon tusks.
We look at the history and what we've done as Moravians and how it has impacted our church and the kinds of things that we carry on from there, whether it's the relics of our mission field, whether it's the mastodon tusks or the other kinds of things that we show as part of our history. But I think bringing our children in, bringing the young people into understanding what it's like to have that kind of different life, the things I learned from my parents without knowing I was learning them at the time. I think that has been so important to us, and for me particularly, not remembering it but being reminded about this for my 29 years that I am now has meant a lot to me in terms of being able to say, that's an experience you can't go back on. It's part of you, it's what you do. Infancy on, you were taught to give back, and it became part of your life. It's not something that you now have to say, oh yeah, I need to give back to the community or to people or to organizations. It's something that's just part of you now. You look at it and you say, that's what I would do. Why wouldn't I do that?
It's not a tax incentive situation because it's a write-off. It's a right thing to do.
Doing the Share the Heritage on Alaska is a big way of doing it. I've had some contacts with other children who are children of missionaries that have been there, and I think to provide a basis for saying, hey, and I think looking at the collections and saying, wow, we have some things here that are really so important to our history as Moravians. They're such an important part of our history as a society, and to look into the future of what we can give to the community.